hit search and type in Lauderhill, it will come right up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. The date is February 20. Thank you for joining us for AY. Um, we had a very powerful message this morning by Sister Claudia Allen. I mean, I was just getting chills throughout the entire message. Very powerful, very compelling. And so we're just going to pray to get started. And then after that, we'll go straight to Pastor and we'll get into the AY program for today. So please bow your heads and close your eyes with me as we pray. Dear Lord, thank you for waking us up this morning and letting us see this beautiful Sabbath. Please help us to remember that we are all one people and we are not to be separated by things that are so trivial and of this world, but we are to remember that we are from you and we are to love you as we are, and you will accept us and bring us closer to you. Thank you for guiding us and protecting us this far. And please let us get a blessing from this AY. In your son's name we pray, amen. All right. Handing it over to Pastor Gordon now. Thank you, everyone.
All right, Sydney, thank you very much. Now, I want you to stay right there. I don't want you to go anywhere because you're going to be included in this next segment. Good afternoon, everybody. We want to have, as Sydney said in his introduction, we had a powerful morning this morning as we heard the word, and we want everyone to give us, think about something that stuck in their spirit, something that touched them out of this morning's message. We saw a lot of comments and we've been having conversations over lunch. My phone has been blowing up and just, things going back and forth. And we just want to share that. Before we get into that, but think about it, because we know that there are some folks who are online, who are watching on YouTube and Facebook. We want to just make sure that everybody's on the same page, no pun intended, as to how we can access and what we want to do. We really want to find, if we can, that we come in through Zoom. So if we use the Zoom platform, we are going to make that available to you so that you can join the webinar link. Now that allows you to be part of the conversation, and that brings us a little closer together. So we want to do that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can join us, and the webinar is 8719 838 2009. Okay, so that is 871 983 8209. Now, I got my glasses on, so I don't even know if I can't read with my glasses on. May the Lord help me. All right. So that is the number. And so we're going to put that out there. We're going to put it in the chat. You can also, I'm going to put that for the attendees. You can message, send that out so that we can be sure. In fact, what we may do is ask one of our co-hosts just to put that on the screen for us. I'll put it also in the chat for the attendees. So that number again, if you're watching outside of Zoom right now, it's 871-9838-2099. So you can join our webinar and be part of the conversation. And so once again, we welcome and we thank God that he has given us this opportunity to share in conversation together. This morning, we heard from Claudia Marin Allen, a writer who has published articles on faith, culture, and justice in religious and non-religious magazines and journals. She is a contributing author to Reverend Dr. Gail Fisher Stewart's latest book, Preaching Black Lives Matter. and Dr. Maury Jackson and Nathan Brown's forthcoming book, A House on Fire, Why Anti-Racism is an Adventist Imperative. Woo! We need to hear a little bit about that on this afternoon. And so we're just thrilled, we're glad that she is able to be with us, not only this morning, but this afternoon. Now, to let you know, most recently, January 18th, our speaker was awarded, given the first Drum Major for Justice Award at Washington Adventist University. And she has as I will get a theme for her ministry: do justice, love mercy, Micah 6:8, and walk humbly with God. And her favorite text is Philippians 2:13, for it is God who is working in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. And so we welcome again our speaker, Claudia Allen. We want to say just how blessed and thrilled we were to have you with us on today, on this morning. And we know that God has something more that he will say to us. Now, we also have with us a few persons who will be joining our conversation, and we're going to introduce them a little later on, but we want to hear from our speaker. We want you to put in the comments something that you got from this morning's message, this afternoon's message. Don't be shy. You can type it, you can text it, you can tweet it, but let's try and put it in the comments so that we can see it there. And speaker, over to you. Thank you again.
Man, thank you all again so much for the invitation. You guys don't go anywhere. Keep your cameras on, mics on, because I definitely want to begin with a question before we get going. So again, just thank you so much, Pastor Gordon, for the invitation and for being here. This afternoon, the presentation I have entitled Living Beyond the Dash, Restoration, Solidarity, and Bridging the Gap Within the African Diaspora, Living Beyond the Gap. And this really was kind of birthed out of several conversations I have had with a couple of friends of mine. One is Dr. Tiffany Llewellyn, who is first generation immigrant. And she is of Trinidadian background, and she is currently a DACA dreamer. And the second is a woman by the name of Datrian Pelegi, whose parents actually were Caribbean immigrants, but they immigrated before the Civil Rights Movement, and so they participated in marching with Dr. King down south in Alabama. And so we have had a myriad of conversations that I felt I wanted to try to recreate here because it really produced a lot of healing, I know, just within the three of us. And so one of the things that they mentioned, I believe Datrian actually kind of came up with the phrasing, but this whole idea of living between the dash, this idea that all of us kind of have this hyphenated reality in that we are something hyphen, right? So I am African American or Black American, or someone is Trinidadian American or Jamaican American or Haitian American. We all occupy this space of the hyphenation. And if anyone has the audacity to assign you to a different hyphenation, you more than likely will get some kind of a intense response reaction, right? You know, like let's be real. It's gonna be light. We're gonna have fun this afternoon, right? Like, you know, like if I come up to a Trini and I mistake them for Haitian, I, as a Black American, am in trouble, right?
You're in big trouble, not just a little bit of trouble.
I'm not just in a little bit of trouble. I'm in a lot of, if I had the audacity to call a Jamaican a Trinidadian, listen, I might not even be allowed in the home that I was invited to ever again at this point, right? You know what I mean? Like we all occupy and live within this hyphenated reality. And I really want us to kind of dig and dive into, where does that come from? What's the science behind it? What's the psychology behind it? And what is God expecting of us in relation to it? All right. Now, before we get there, I have noticed that whenever I have the opportunity to do a morning experience and then an afternoon experience, more than likely the people come into the church, right? Back pre-COVID, we would all be in the sanctuary right now, right? And we would be in there and all of you would be like, Claudia, we cannot talk about living beyond, the dash. I have to get some things off my chest about this morning. Okay. I got a lot in my spirit. You said some things I agree with. You said some things I disagreed with. You said some stuff that rubbed me the wrong way. You said some stuff I liked, and I need to get some things off my chest. And so before I say anything new, I want to give everybody that is on here the opportunity to let's just reflect, let's respond, let's talk together. Just what are some of your feelings, your reflections about this morning? And for those of us that are in the Zoom, I would love to hear your voices, but if not, please feel free to write in the chat. I know my introverted friends are not always here for being on camera and being heard. So
did you say introverted friends as if like you are one of them? Is that what you?
No, like my best friend is an introvert.
Oh, right, okay.
I know many introverts. And so by proximity, I've learned now to give them space to share in ways that are comfortable for them.
Right.
Yes. So anybody who is willing, able, please, I see so many of you have joined on YouTube now. The link and the meeting ID is right there if you want to come into the Zoom and talk to us directly. But for those of us who are here right now, I'd love to just get some of your responses. If you had a question, if you had a, Claudia, I don't agree with that in your spirit. If you had I'm right there with you in your spirit, I really want to hear it.
All right, so want to welcome, just for those who are immediate panelists, we have Bev and Clinton Maddox. We have Sydney Pinnock, our youth leader, and we have Donna Marie Duncan, communications and everything technology at Covenant. And want to welcome her. And there are a few other folks that will be joining, but those are the folks that are here. If you want to speak, if you want to put in the chat, you can do so. If you want to speak, you can also raise your hand and we can open up your mic depending on what scope we have for that. So, okay, let's start with the panel. We got some stuff in the chat too. So let's start with that. Go ahead,
Systematic. Listen, everybody come off mute. Let's just go, y'all. Come on.
Unless you got a yapping dog, don't worry.
Well, I'm gonna read something that's in the chat. Reflection. Salvation does not require assimilation. Each should be allowed to express their uniqueness. This thought got me thinking. That's from Dawn Lawson. And I remember you saying that, talking about that this morning. Do you want to elaborate for her?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for even bringing that one up. If I'm honest, I have noticed that Blacks across the diaspora, particularly within our Adventist traditional context, have a way of really not embracing our Blackness in our worship experience. So that even when I traveled to Tanzania on Sabbath morning, people were wearing suits and were singing hymns like this was an opera class. And I was personally kind of shocked because I was like, man, I'm in Tanzania. I want to hear the Swahili. I want to hear the harmonies. I wanted to worship, like we worship. And for the first half of Sabbath morning, I could have been at anybody's, traditional conservative white or European Adventist church. Then the next, towards the latter end of the service, then they did a couple of Swahili songs and a couple of songs in Swahili. And when I tell you the spirit, that it was like a shift in the atmosphere. I mean, everyone's just essence, aura, all about them just flipped. And then praise was going up. And I mean, people, like, they were marching around and they were doing things with their hands. And I was like, okay, that's what I was looking for. And I know my Caribbean friends have told me that sometimes it's similar in various islands as well, in the sense that you can be in Jamaica, you can be in Trinidad, you can be in Tobago or Barbados, and you're not going to get an island flair during the worship experience. And if anything, it's almost as though this is a bad thing. Like, to have any semblance of our kind of unique Blackness within our expression of worship, within our preaching, within the things that we talk about on Sabbath morning, is almost viewed as problematic or even sinful at times. And when I saw that space in the text in Esther, where it said that they wrote that decree in all of those different languages and sent it out, the Holy Spirit just really came over me and was just like, Claudia, what if it was the same for so many of us in our countries around the world, that like, what if like we really experienced God and the gospel, and we got the gospel in a way where I could sing it with a reggae beat, or like you could put a little calypso up under it and we'd be all right, you know, like, and everything would be okay. And so that's kind of the thinking behind that. Do you guys agree with that? Do you disagree with that? You know, I welcome the pushback.
Yeah. I think perhaps the and I'm speaking in Adventism now because that's basically all I know. And having been as an immigrant from the Caribbean, I grew up to 18 in the island of Jamaica. Then I've spent my college years and my adult years. Now I'm a grandparent here. I think Adventism is particularly prescriptive.
Okay.
Not just in terms of music maybe, or as you described it, flair, but in just about every single way. The way missionaries take the Advent message to anyone that is not European, it is basically given the same way. And it is prescriptive. It is to some extent Adventism in the past, and I'm speaking from my age, has been very pharisaical. And that goes very much hand in hand with prescribing speech, behavior, clothing, ideas, and anything out of that is not accepted. Now, I think currently the young people, and I'm talking about the pastors who are probably 40, and you too, Pastor, you're on the edge.
Thank you. I was about to jump in and say, I know I'm not there anymore, but
talking about the mindset. I say your
mindset.
Age, because my children's peers who are pastors are not the usual. They're cut from a different cloth, and their churches are like, for example, Wesley Knight or Myron Emmons or Seth Your Lord. These people they're not conforming. And Adventism has basically pushed conformity.
Okay.
To the detriment of the people, because if you conform, you tend not to understand why you're even conforming. You don't understand the principle, you only understand the rule. And I think that is also a piece. It's not just Black, it's all, that's part of it too.
That's so good. I totally agree with you, Sister Maddock, because I really feel like because we were indoctrinated according to a rule, we lost the spirit and we lost the relationship. And so now you have, ultimately white people are leaving the church. right? Like white people are no longer even comfortable with a certain kind of worship style or certain kind of prescriptions and things like that. And now, quite frankly, it's only certain Black people that are trying to hold on to a certain indoctrination that we received decades ago, while they're over there trying to innovate because they're losing all of their young people and all of their young adults. And we are losing ours too. And so the question is, are we willing to kind of loose ourselves from this prescription, as you so well articulated it, and really kind of come to God in a way that is unique to us? One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of Hagar. And she's one of my favorite stories because she's in the wilderness and she has this encounter with God in her wilderness moment. And when she meets God, she names God for herself. How many times have we, in our own condition, in our own culture, in our own uniqueness, sat and named God for ourselves? That is what I want to encourage Black people across the diaspora to do, is to have such an intimate encounter with God that you no longer simply accept the names of God that have been given to you, or the attributes, or the ideas, the concepts about God that have been given to you, but instead you engage in such deep intimacy with him that you name him based on your own unique experience. I see Miss Dawn. Please go ahead, please.
No, I didn't raise my hand. I was actually scratching my face. Sorry.
No, I think it was a Mr. Maddock.
Yeah, my sense is that it is a gargantuan task to deconstruct Seventh-day Adventism as we have it. Mm-hmm. Because you're calling upon many stakeholders to make changes.
Yeah.
And the majority of the stakeholders who want it to remain the same are largely the ones who have the power in the church. Mm. So how do you ask Neil Wilson, Ted Wilson, I'm sorry, or others like him, Batchelor, all these people, to make those changes? It seems to me we need to define what essential Christianity is, and then have people moving in that direction. And I think therein lies the problem. Because essential Christianity is culture bound. And so if we can distill what Jesus is all about, and then start from that place, we may have some success, but I am not very optimistic.
Wow, that was so good, Brother Maddock. Go ahead, Sydney.
Well, I was just thinking, because you're saying about coming to God. I remember in the Bible it says, come to God as you are. So I feel like what we have to do first is find ourselves, because if you don't know yourself, you can't build a proper relationship with anyone, really. So when we have to look within ourselves, and then when we look within ourselves, we can come to God and as we would come to God, because the way I would come to God may not be the same way someone else would come to God, may not be the same way someone else comes to God. And I feel like we have to start at the bottom where we are and control what we can control, and then we move outward.
Man, that is so good. Oh, go ahead, Pastor Gordon.
Yeah, it's been in the church pretty much all my life, that there are so many things that we take for granted. We forget, for instance, our Adventist roots, come out of, Methodism. And so we think that, so you'll hear people say things like a wonderful Adventist hymn, exactly. and it's written by one of the Wesley brothers, or and so this is godly music, and that the actual instrumental was formerly a battle song, or even a drinking song, and so part of what we have is ignorance, a lack of knowledge about some of the roots and seeds of the things that we practice as what we would say is a thus saith the Lord, which is really just Adventist culture that has come out of Eurocentric perspectives, and more recently, our Methodist and Millerite, history. So I think, having that understanding is really critical. And one of the comments, there's a couple comments in the YouTube chat, which, I think we may say ouch, but it's really true. It says, we are all remnants of the plantation. We have plantation loyalty, gonna learn to get along in Jesus' name.
Right.
Then it says here, colonialism is ingrained in us. Takes a cultural shift to embrace who we are and not to see it as a shameful thing. We are and always have been African. And I think the impact of colonialism on the version of Christianity that is really very much part of Adventist history, and of course things like the temperance movement and the abolitionist movement, in addition to other things, have significantly shaped where we are in our theology and our perspective. Maybe, and one would even question whether it's significantly shaped the theology, but definitely a lot of our practices and traditions. Right. I remember being at a camp meeting at one time, one of the speakers from Zimbabwe, and there was this big controversy back then in my former conference about drums, and people talking about, you had these speakers, I won't name names, talking about they'd quote Ellen White, mysterious rappings or frivolous ditty fit for the dance hall, and they have no idea what dance hall is, but anyhow, let me know. Yeah. But what was interesting was, and it's kind of comical, he said, you're talking about demons and drums. He said, where I come from, demons don't get out unless you're 2 hours or 3 hours into it, dropping on the floor. He said, yo, man, drums for two minutes and you're worried about demons. He said, you don't need to just get the music right, and it was kind of humorous for us because, again, it was this idea that, any kind of beat, any kind of rhythm, any kind of movement. And for years, we all remember this in the 80s. Those of us who are, old enough to remember in the 80s, you'd stand in the choir, hands clasped together and, to show no emotion. And then choir starts to kind of sway a little bit, and there's this progression of, okay, and I'm still spiritual. God is still speaking to me. I can lift up my hands. I can shout hallelujah. I can dance. And the Spirit of God is still at work. And I think there's a lot of stuff that we need to unlearn, decolonize, to quote, a phrase that's been used, because we have associated certain practices with spirituality and true Adventism. And I think if we were to move forward, we need to lose that mentality. So
I firmly agree. I really encourage, obviously I encourage this from the pastors, but I really encourage it from the laity as well, because like the Maddox even said, right, we can't wait for some kind of major institutional leader to kind of walk us through this unlearning process, right? Like at some point we have to say, like you're talking about, Pastor Gordon, I'm identifying that this is not an actual truth. This is not a biblically based truth. It is not hinged or attached to my salvation. And in fact, it is a subtle attack at my personhood. And so while identifying that, I now need to unlearn, and relearn, how do I now come to God? Because the Bible is not I don't know how many times I've had to say this in conversations with people Sydney's age, but the Bible is not a white book. Christianity is not a white religion. Jesus is not someone that has been created for the purposes of white supremacy, right? The Bible is an Eastern text written by Eastern people of color for the world, right? There are Black and brown people all throughout that text. And so if that is the true historical nature of the scriptures, then we as Black and brown people can now approach that text and approach our religion, not from the colonized picture that we have been given, but rather the more accurate picture that is actually written within the text, right? And I think that's when it comes down to, how now can I approach the scriptures to find the people of color within it, to find the oppression within it, and even greater than to ask the question, how is God interacting with people of color in the text? How is God interacting with oppressed people in the text? And then what does that now mean for me? And how now did they respond to that God in the text? How did they worship that God in the text? What does that mean for me? Right? So I know we could go down this road, but I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen, if at all possible. Let me know when I can do that.
Okay, I'm sorry, I got carried away and forgot to.
It's okay.
Yeah, tech team. And while we're doing that, just a couple of thoughts from the YouTube chat. Even the old-time Adventists didn't like some of the music in church, drums, etc. No clapping in church. I remember growing up in the 80s, and people saying things like Adventists don't clap, you know. And I wondered where did that come from? And you know, going back to what you were saying to youth, we, you know, and this may be controversial for some, we do have to accept that there are some things that we teach or that we promulgate as a people that are not biblical. They may be what we think is the best practice, so that we kind of keep air on the side of caution. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we want to keep away from the danger zone. So we'll just kind of throw everything, you know, into the basket of negativity, so that we create. But one of the interesting things is the majority of those things, or a significant portion of those things, are things that relate to Black and brown culture.
Yes.
You see what I mean? So the instruments, let's talk about music, for instance, you know, anything that would engender a beat. However, a piano, you know, is, you know, technically a percussion instrument, you know, but we would not say, well, we throw the piano out, but, you know, we throw the drums out. And it's the fact that we have bought into so many of these narratives, and we haven't realized.
But Pastor Gordon, I think that is, we're rarely at the table that gets to make these determinations, right? Because there was a period of time when the organ was not welcome in the church. There was a period of time when the acoustic guitar was not welcome in the church, right? Like many instruments that we now welcome that might not be the drum set, right, were not at all welcome either. And so the reality is that as culture shifts and changes, rarely do Black people get to be at the table to determine that, particularly when it comes to religious and liturgical engagement. We're always in the passive position of, well, they said we can play the organ now, so okay, we'll play the organ. They said we can play the saxophone now, so we'll play the saxophone, right? And I see Sister Maddock is like at the...
Yeah. Part of the problem is generational.
Okay.
The folks with power are the older people. And they are steeped in all the prescriptions that were handed down. And I venture to say, for example, when it comes to women being ordained, it's the Africans who are the greatest foes with this particular idea, notion in the church.
Yeah.
And if you go to the Caribbean, I can tell you, you're not going to find it, I mean, maybe a little less so, but not as welcomed as it is, for example, in North America and even in Europe. So part of it is generational, and that is why the younger pastors, they are the ones who are going to step out and do their thing. And the older people, they're not going to go there because they don't like that church, because it's not, you know, it's not spiritual or whatever.
Yeah.
And eventually a shift will occur.
Brother Mannix, I saw your hand.
I think as an older person, I'm 75 plus. So I'm from the old school.
Is that an age, Brother Mannix, 75 plus?
Yes, yeah. And so
like, this is my group. Don't come for Elder Maddox.
I know, right? Let me back up. Sorry, teacher.
Pastor Gordon, there is some room for, I don't know if the word is tolerance, because there are people at my age who have been so steeped in the non-essential Christianity that we have no embrace it as part of what our expression should be. And so, you know, am I brainwashed? Yes, I'm brainwashed. Can I distill all that stuff and come out of that? Yes, I can, but I'm not going to get out of it completely. So there was room for some kind of tolerance for the people like myself who, when I hear a song that is being sung over and over and over and over again, I'm just saying, okay, I got the message. Don't tell me I have to hear it 7 times or 8 times or 10 times. I got it. But there are younger people, I would imagine, who are looking for that repetitive stuff. All I'm saying is that there is room for all, and we shouldn't begin to attempt to throw out what is Anglo-Saxon Christianity, because a lot of us have embraced it.
Not all of it.
Not all of it.
Some of it needs to go.
I go, but I'm just saying we have to find that balance. To say, what is this? And I go back to the notion, essential Christianity. You know, where do we draw the line so that my disposition for, you know, a 3 stanza song is okay and can be tolerated by somebody who wants a 10 stanza song or repetitive version of the song. Yeah. So there is room for tolerance, and I'm concerned that the people who are maybe like me, who should be part of the conversation, for sure, are not part of the conversation. They just say, this is the edict. That's it.
Sydney, you got a fire shut up in your bones.
And I'll tell you, one of the difficulties with being old is that, and enlightened.
Okay.
Because you're exposed and you try to, I mean, we're old in chronological age, but we're not old in the way we think. But even then, for example, my grandchildren challenge my notions every day. I have to tell you, I'm so uncomfortable with a lot that they think and believe. And I step back and I do this thing in my head and I said, you know something, the Bible didn't say that it was wrong. So I have to realize that it's not salvific. But I have to tell you, I'm still uncomfortable. And there are some of us in that space, much less the ones who they're not going to accept anything, period.
Man, this is so good. And, you know, really, the 2 things that are standing out to me from the Maddox that I really want everybody to walk away from this conversation with, at the least, 1, essential Christianity, identifying that, moving, living, and walking in that, but then also learning how to be uncomfortable, right? Like, I think that there are some things that our elders certainly need to be uncomfortable with, but there are some things that myself and Sydney have to sit with and be uncomfortable with as well. And so where is that tension that the generations can engage in together so that we can both learn from one another? Sydney, go ahead.
Well, I think it's important to emphasize that traditions are not bad. Like, just because you want to sing but you don't want music, it does not mean that God is not going to accept your praise. But what we are kind of saying is more like, because I want music does not mean that God is against me. So because Pastor was talking about in the 80s they weren't allowed to play music. I remember a couple of years ago I went to a church and they said, please don't clap, just have a hearty amen. And I'm over here like, you know, coming from Lauderhill, which some people told me was bad. And I know Lauderhill people wouldn't step foot in that church. So it's a lot of give and take, and it's a lot of back and forth. And I think a lot of the time we just have to associate with who we want to associate with, but also, like the Maddox said, not be afraid to be uncomfortable. Yeah. Because just because, you know, my Christian song might have a rap beat, which it might, and I'm not saying it will, but it might, does not mean that God is going to look down upon me, because nowhere in the Bible does it say, thou shalt not rap your Christian lyrics. So, you know.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, I'm going to be honest, Sydney, like, let's say the Lord should delay his coming and the Maddox are resting in peace and I become the Maddox and somebody stands up in church and the hymn of meditation is a rap song. I'm going to tell you right now in 2021, my spirit is unsettled. Okay.
I agree.
I'm about just as uncomfortable as Sister Maddox. Okay. Right. So it's like every generation is going to have its thing. I'm not saying that would ever really happen, but you know, every generation is going to have its thing. And I think the sooner we can learn to embrace ourselves as a people and not identify like worship has to be done this way. This is the only way that God can receive worship. And really understand how our mindset and our colonization is attached to that, then I think that, you know, what we'll see in the future is a more free worship, not necessarily one that is like completely loose or chaotic, but certainly one that is much more open, much more progressive. All right. Now we've got a transition, guys. We've got more to talk about. We're gonna keep talking. We're just gonna switch the topic just a little bit. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. Living beyond the dash. Okay, so like I said, you know, really wanting to talk through the hyphenations that differentiate us, but also provide some similarities. Now, if there's anything that I really want all of you to kind of take away from this afternoon, or really just from today, I kind of mentioned it this morning as well, it's that discipleship requires a commitment to the holistic healing of people within and outside our cultural communities, right? Like, even if we look at this picture right here, this is a civil rights march. We can see right there at the very front, Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King. But if we look in that crowd, there are some white people in there. I see a nun in there. There are dark-skinned black folk, light-skinned black folk, big black folk, little black folk. We've got a myriad of people, right, who are in this crowd that are saying, hey, we are going to join in solidarity towards a purpose, towards an end goal. And what I'm saying is that our power is in our unity. It is when we can all come together, Jamaican, Black American, Trini, Barbadian, you know, British, afro-latino, Cuban, you know, it's when we can all come together and say, okay, what is our end goal? What is our united end goal for salvation? And how can we come together and work together despite the language differences or the cultural differences or anything like that? Now, what I want us to talk about right now, just for a little bit, is the dash. Now, when you think of the dash, what comes to your mind, guys? Come off mute real quick. And remember, we're talking about that cultural distinction, right? We're talking about that hyphenation. So when you think about that dash, why is it so? Or I'll ask it like this. Let me ask it like this. Why do you guys think that the dash is so important? Why is it that we place such a heavy burden on this dash within our culture?
Well, adjective describe, and we have to have an adjective.
Well, it's not that important for me. I mean, I was born in England, raised by Trinidadians, went to high school in Trinidad, and have been living in the US for the past 21 years. And I'm thinking, well, how many dashes do I have? And which, it's never been a thing for me. You know, if you want to call me African American, if you want to call me Caribbean American or British American, I don't know. I don't care. I don't know what it's supposed to mean anyway. So I'll just be me. And if you need to call me what you need to call me, that's fine too. And I'll just move on. You talk about the dash, and I was there screwing my eyebrows up trying to figure out, well, which what comes on either side of my dash? I don't know.
I'm so glad you shared that, man. Thank you so much for saying that. I'm gonna put a pin right there. I saw your hand, Mr. Maddock.
I think there is all of us have a need for identification, and if we function in several spheres or worlds, and we find value in those spheres, we want to incorporate them into our identity. Mm-hmm. So if I am Jamaican and I spend a lot of my time living in America, mm-hmm. I somehow find value, hopefully, in those two worlds. And I want to make those two value sets part of my identification. Mm-hmm. So when I say I'm Jamaican American, mm-hmm. I'm trying to identify those things about the values in America that I want to be a part of my value set. Mm-hmm. And I also am not going to discard what has been part of my value set when I was growing up. Yeah. So I think the dash really says, here is my attempt to define identity and to what I belong. And I think it's part of, it's a human experience that I think is important. If I go around identifying myself as Jamaican in the American context, I am actually insulting Americans, and I'm also insulting Jamaicans. So I'm trying to find that balance, and the dash says somewhere in between there, I have a leg in both worlds, and I value both worlds. I don't necessarily have to embrace everything in each world, but there's some valuable things I want to maintain. So, for example, I want to maintain eating my ackee and saltfish.
Yes.
I want to maintain eating my patty.
Yes.
But at the same time, I want to eat lasagna. And I want to go to Disney World, or I want to go to a concert where I hear jazz. But I still want to hear my reggae.
Mm-hmm. This is so good. My heart feels so good. Sydney, go ahead.
So I was just listening, and it's really hitting close to home personally, because I have Jamaican heritage and I have Indian heritage. So I'm kind of like coming from other, and even if you ask my mom, she'll say I'm part Canadian too. But it's kind of just coming from everywhere. But I have to ask, do sometimes we as Black people try to escape our Blackness by using a dash? Like my dad grew up in Lehigh, which, if you don't know, Lehigh is racist. Let's just put it like that. But his friends would go around and they'll bring him around another white guy. White guy, oh, who is this guy? And he'll be like, oh, don't worry, he's not Black, he's Jamaican. He's not.
Well, that's used to divide. This notion of dividing and conquering is not, it's real. And sometimes it's done to put a wedge where there really is no wedge by the individual. Like your father himself doesn't feel that wedge, but someone else is putting the wedge in because they feel it'll make the other person more comfortable.
Right.
So it's not always, when I fill out a form, I describe myself as African American. Always. I've been in America longer than I was in Jamaica, but I am Jamaican. And I'm not and I don't feel that I should need to say that I'm not. I'm both.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't because I'm trying to make myself better in one context or the other.
Mm-hmm.
That's just who I am, because I am really both.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent all my adult life here, and through 18 there, and raised by those parents and those values, and my family and the way I cook. So I'm both.
Yeah.
But it should be okay.
It absolutely should. And I appreciate everything that you guys are saying. The two things that I totally agree with. I think that the dash is, like we've been saying, both a positive and a negative, right? Because on the one hand, like we've all been saying, the dash is that identifier. It allows us to connect to who we are. I know for me, different people would ask me all the time, Claudia, why are you so staunch on saying you're African American? Like, why do you always say you're African American? Why can't you just say you're American? Because my familial roots go all the way back to enslavement on this continent. So Claudia, you're basically just American. But I would always get angry and I would say, no, I'm not just American, right? Because there's this idea that to quote unquote be just American is to be white. And I felt like there was an African aspect, a Black aspect of my being that was being erased when people wanted me to exclusively identify as American. And then what I really realized what it was is I heard someone put it like this. They said to be African American is to be African without memory and to be American without privilege.
Oh.
To be African American is to be African without memory and American without privilege. And so like the Maddox were talking about, this dash, it does something to connect me to some stuff that was taken and was lost, right? That's important, that's critical. But the dash is also detrimental because what it does is the dash also creates, as you can see on the screen, the dash creates a box. And Miss Donna Marie Duncan doesn't fit in that box. And there are many Blacks that don't fit in that box. And so what then happens is, well, then what is my Blackness then if my Blackness cannot be confined to your dash? Is my Blackness now illegitimate because it does not fit into your dash? And the answer is no. And that is what race and racialization in America has done, is it tends to create these boxes that force us to operate in and identify from. And when we don't properly fit into those boxes, then we, quite frankly, quite many of us have identity crises, at least when you're living in a racialized society. And so some people do a great job, like Ms. Donna Marie said. I'm Donna Marie. I'm not in the box. I'm not outside the box. I'm not stressing about the box. I'm not even thinking about the box. I'm living my life. I'm doing good, right? Whereas there are other people who are deeply unsettled by the fact that they can't fit in the box and they no longer know who they are because of their parameter or proximity to that box. But then the other detriment about the dash is what Sydney was talking about, in the sense that I do think, and this gets into the tension that, I really kind of want us to deal with a little bit as well, is the dash also becomes a way that we separate from one another, right? And I spoke about this in the sermon earlier this morning. The dash becomes a way for me to not care about the destruction, death, or extermination of an African outside of my tribe. And so if we don't share a dash, then whatever happens to the Jamaicans is irrelevant to me. Whatever happens to the Kenyans is irrelevant to me. They've got their own dash. They've got their own group. They've got their box. You worry about your box. I'm going to worry about my box. And like Sister Maddox said, we can't live like that. We can't accomplish anything like that. That distinction is literally harmful to us and our communities. That divide and conquer concept was given to us. And so we've got to be willing to say, okay, you know what? We've got this dash. Let's think critically about it. What are the things about the dash that I do need to keep? The things that Mr. Maddox was talking about, the identity and the having the two legs and being able to connect, right? But then what are the things about the dash that I need to disconnect from and make sure that I'm not engaging in, that I'm not perpetuating this kind of internal violence? Because the dash really becomes a weapon that I now as a Black American am using against Black Caribbeans, Black Africans, Afro-Latinos, Black British people. I now use the dash as a weapon. And what we've got to do is we've got to stop using the dash as a weapon. Miss Lawson, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to pick up on that point you made about the fact that the dash has been used very successfully to divide us. And I somehow see it as being imposed on us. And with this imposition, we have tried to make our best with it. So we say, oh, it's self-identity. It helps me to keep my uniqueness and so forth. But what many of us don't understand is that this imposition of this dash is the way they have managed to keep us separate. So we lose the Ubuntu of who Black people are, one people under God, no difference. So I don't mind being called anything, because I know in my heart I'm Black, and that's it. But there is a method behind the madness of this Trinidad and American, Jamaican, and there is a method behind that madness, which we are going to have to systematically break down as individuals and as a church.
So good, so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So great. So when we think about the dash, what that is called in sociology is the hyphenation. It's called hyphenation ethnicities, right? And so it's this idea that while whites self-identify as Americans, non-white Americans recognize that they are not Americans, but African Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, or Latino Americans. In this sense, how one becomes American or how one assimilates into American society depends in large part on one's racial status. And so one thing we've got to also deal with, acknowledge in this conversation is that particularly when you're talking about African immigrants from around the globe, you're dealing with a body of people who are trying to assimilate and if assimilate is not the correct word, to accustom themselves to a new society. And the fact of the matter is that because America is a racialized society that is birthed on these kinds of distinctions that Miss Dawn Lawson was just talking about, it then imposes upon people the need to identify in this way, in ways that they otherwise would not even want to identify. But because of survival, because of, like Sister Maddox was talking about, there are legal forms that I have to fill out. So now I have to put myself in a box. I have to figure out how to live, how to move, how to be successful in this new country. And in order for me to be able to do that, I've got to identify which box I'm going to be in. And that, I think, is a kind of racial trauma, because it forces immigrant peoples to either pick coming into this larger African American umbrella, which is that box, that dash, or completely leave whatever country they're coming from, right? Like even when we think about citizenship, right? That process of naturalization, some of the things that you have to say in order to become a citizen in America is basically you have to say sayonara to absolutely everything that was your previous country. And that kind of trauma, I think, generates this need to say, hey, okay, so what you're not going to do is that. What I am going to be is Haitian American. If I have to have this dash, what we are going to do is I'm gonna put a little stank on it. It's Trinidadian American. It's because I'm not comfortable completely disconnecting from this very real aspect of myself in order to legally be in this country. And I think that is something that I really want my Caribbean brothers and sisters to know and understand, is that psychological process, that psychological and sociological ask of you, I think is a traumatic, abusive ask that is rooted in white supremacy.
Absolutely.
Mr. Maddox, I saw your hand.
There's another side, I think, to this, which I'm not necessarily comfortable with, but I think when let's say we remove the dash.
Yeah.
So by removing the dash, the person, or with a truly African culture and a Caribbean culture, let's call it Caribbean for the time being, are from the outsiders, and by outsiders I mean the white society, begins to assume there's a certain monolithic element to everybody who says, I'm African, I'm not African American or Haitian American, but I'm African. So it creates in the mind of the and I want to just say white people, a notion that this is a monolithic structure here of all of these people, and they're all the same.
But see, this is the thing,
irrespective of their culture.
You're right.
Because Africa doesn't necessarily mean there's no such thing as an African culture.
Right.
There are 50-something countries in Africa with linguistic differences, historical differences, cultural differences, and then you go to the Caribbean or to Peru or to Central America, and there are people there who are with African ancestry, but culturally are diverse. So when we remove the hyphen, isn't there a possibility that the other world will view those who consider themselves to be non-hyphenated as a monolithic?
So this is the thing, Mr. Maddox. They already think that.
Okay.
They're not aware of they're not aware of the hyphen.
Thank you.
Yes.
The only hyphen they have is African American. That's the only hyphen they have. When once we get into the nitty-gritty of it, this is something that we do internally.
Okay.
They don't know, and quite frankly, I don't think they even care. And that's really what I'm hoping that this conversation can get us to. By the time we get to the end of this, I want us all to realize that while we might be different, we are the same. At least particularly when it comes to dealing with this social decree that is on us for death, destruction, and extermination. So that now I'm willing to do the work of protecting you, even though you're Trinidadian, because the fact of the matter is, I'm the only person that is able to tell that difference or that distinction. The system that is actively working to oppress both of us does not make a distinction. They don't care.
That's true.
Miss Lawson, I heard you trying to come in.
No, actually was about to say the same thing that you said. The truth is that we are already seen as one group. But also, I think another purpose that the dash serves is a reminder, or is the position that you really don't belong. Don't get comfortable. You don't belong. And you know what? I'm absolutely fine with that, because I think of myself as a pilgrim in every stage of my life until we get to Jordan, across Jordan. But I think the psychology of the dash too is just to let you know you don't belong. Because we never hear European Americans. Have anybody ever heard Hungarian Americans, German Americans? No. Why is it okay just to make them be Americans, but the rest of us have to have something to classify us? Because there's a psychology that is saying to us, you don't belong. And that psychology then forces us sometimes to grab onto the difference, because now we have no place to be. We're living in America sometimes longer than we've lived in our native land. So now you have no place to be. So then you've got to keep holding on to the Jamaican and all of this. And it is a way that they've managed to keep us where they want us. I'm different from you because that difference makes me exist. Literally, it speaks to my existence because I'm already told by a social structure that I don't belong.
Man, thank you so much for that. That's so good. So I really want to ask you guys if this question applies to you. And I see you in here, Mackenzie Francois. If you ever at any point want to chime in, feel free, come off mute, and we'd love to have you in here as well. Sydney, I just saw your hand. Go ahead.
I specifically remember being about like 4 or 5, and I was talking to my friends, and I'm like, I don't ever think I've seen a white person. And I grew up in South Florida, so I've definitely seen a white person before then. And I was talking to my mom, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a white person. And she was like, yeah, you have, because my friends are telling me about white people this, and I'm just like, there's no such thing as white people. Like, white people don't exist in my eyes, because I just thought everybody as myself.
Okay.
Right? I thought everybody is I was just darker than really, really light black people, which happened to be white.
But everybody was black.
Right. And that was kind of the moment I was like, maybe there's a difference between us. Maybe maybe the world think it's something more than what I think it is. And I think at that point is when I started growing off of and realizing that I was black.
Okay. Who else would like to share? I'd really love to know, when did you ever realize that you were black? Did you ever know you were not black? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, you mean black phenotypically or black culturally or whatever?
It's It's intentionally ambiguous.
That's black, yeah.
Black by social, by the social classifier.
Okay.
Not like yours, not you looking in the mirror, looking at your skin color like, oh, this is that. Like, when did you come to realize what it really meant to be black within society?
I was gonna say, for me, finding out that I was black, well, like going to schools, usually when you learn things like this, and me going to predominantly black schools growing up, you don't really see people outside of your culture. And it wasn't until, I'd say, middle schools where we would do math competitions, where we'd go to different schools and we'd team up with all these bright kids and everywhere. And I would notice that you'd see just a few, speckles of brown within a room full of whites. And you start to really notice that the huge difference. I mean, even then, I still, I thought I was still in a sea of culture and I didn't really separate myself from black people. I mean, everybody, I guess. And it wasn't until, as I got older and I started looking more and more mature and seeing that I was getting racially profiled, I was like, oh, you start to realize, oh, I'm getting treated like those people on TV. It's not just them, it's also me. And it's because of the way I look that people are treating me this way.
I think I remember. Sorry, Mackenzie, you finished?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. I think I remember, and it's a great question, Doc. So I grew up in a predominantly, I guess somewhere like Broward County, South Florida, predominantly black, well, at least in terms of my circle, my friends, my school, my church, even though we had white members, even in the, I'm gonna say, I'm dating myself here, but like say late 70s, it was by then, a predominantly black congregation. And so there was no consciousness of that. The first time was when we moved away. And interestingly, the lady who looked after us when my parents were at work was a white lady, Mrs. Tucker, the most, probably to this day, the most caring, lovely, white person I've ever met in my life. I mean, she was just, and I don't even remember thinking that she was white. I just remember her as being someone who looked after us and treated us better than our parents did. We would be rude, but she didn't give us that, you know, that punishment, let's say it like that. So Mrs. Tucker, she was a white lady, but I just don't remember it, other than, of course, that was her skin color. But I remember, because we had moved away to a new city, a new modern city that had been built up about 20 miles or 30 miles away from where we lived, which was predominantly white. And with that came the racism. And I remember it vividly, because it was just at the same time, around 79, that Roots came out on TV, and the series, you know, and you go to school and they say, hey, Kunta, you know, and, you know, the all of that, you know, N-word and stuff like that. And so I went from a place of having really no consciousness of that to a, you know, I guess you would almost say a traumatic experience of identifying my Blackness in a way that was painful. It wasn't something that I was celebrating, but it was a way that brought, you know, trauma, where I would not even want to go to school, because I knew, especially on a Monday, because they would air Roots on a Sunday evening, go to school on a Monday morning, and there it was. You know what I mean? It was, yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Miss Donna Marie.
Yeah, I was made aware by my Black brothers and sisters, not the white folks. I grew up in England, you know, mixed neighborhood. So what, you know, you're not really paying attention to that as a kid. In school, again, it was mixed. It was Trinidad. It wasn't a place where there was at least oppression that I could identify. And then when I moved to the US and talked and used the word Negro, which was okay to be used in the Caribbean and other places, that's when I was, you know, given my education very abruptly and very aggressively, you know, because, you know, I was obviously not
and said Negro. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, so you know, I had, you know, enough people that were educated enough around me to be able to let me know what the problem is there, and what the differences are, and why there are differences. So that was my path to that education, came when I moved to the US and brought all my issues with me.
No, that's phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that. Miss Dawn, I see your hand.
I think I always knew I was Black, and part of probably the deepest realization for me in terms of connection was just watching all these series of slavery and just feeling this deep, intense pain, and feeling like almost like I was in the cane field. And I remember as a kid, I used to tell my mother that I could hear voices in the cane field. And I know I'm a little cuckoo, but I felt almost as if I could experience the pain that had gone, and almost as if I was there. So I was very aware that this is who I am from then. When I moved to the US, I remember being at work one day and one of the directors coming around looking for, she was bringing somebody to introduce to my team. And she came and she said, oh, where is this and where is that? And I said, oh, they're out for lunch. She turned to the person that she brought and said, there's nobody here. I was like, what? And I was sitting right there. She said, oh, I'm sorry, there's nobody here. We'll come back when they get back. And for 2 days, I thought about, did this woman just look through me and say, there's nobody here? And I remember saying it to Eddie and saying to my friends, and I like, brush it off. I'm like, no, I can't. About my third day, I went to her and I said, exactly what do you mean by it? There was nobody when I sat there? And she looked at me like I was crazy. And I don't think to this day, she understood that what she said was deeply offensive. But it gave me a good insight into the new cultural structure that I had come in, where this sense of difference and almost you're not human was so normal.
Right.
It was absolutely so normal. So that was an eye-opener for me.
Yeah. One of my favorite writers, Zora Neale Hurston, she says in an essay she wrote called How It Feels to Be Colored Me, she says, I feel most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background. And it just kind of speaks to kind of what some of you have testified of, in the sense that you didn't realize about this label, about this identifier, until you were thrown into either white spaces or had some kind of racist or prejudice experience. Oftentimes it is, particularly with immigrants, Black immigrants, they do not come to an understanding of this until they get thrown onto a sharp white background. And Chimamanda Adichie says she became Black in America. And I always found that to be such a powerful statement from her. But she talks about how the cultural divisions that exist in Nigeria are not based on race, not based on skin color in the way that we see here in America, but rather it's based on religion and ethnicity. So she talks about how in Nigeria, she is a Christian Igbo woman. And that would differentiate her from a Muslim Yoruba man, right? So that the distinction is not her complexion. The distinction is rather in her ethnicity and in her religion. And that, I think, is what doesn't exist here in America. So that you have so many coming from a variety of African countries, coming from a variety of Caribbean countries, or even Central and South American countries. And they're coming here and they're becoming something that they weren't previously. And now having to endure a variety of, all sorts of pain as a result of this new classifier. And it is oftentimes not until many immigrants become Black, it is not until they have these kinds of experiences that they then now become vocal, feel some form of solidarity with the African American, and now want to engage with the social issues in this particular country. She says, quote, "I decided that having understood African American history, I was a part of it. African American history doesn't actually start on the slave ship. It starts in Africa." And I love this quote so much because I think it is so true. I think that it really sets in motion just how important it is for all of us to know and understand that we are connected to a continent. We are all connected to each other. And in fact, I like to say jokingly, the only difference between myself and, let's say, the Maddox and Miss Dawn Marie and Pastor Gordon and Miss Dawn and Sydney and Rickenzie, the only difference between us potentially is that we got dropped off in different spots.
Yep.
You know what I mean? We all got taken, put on the same ship. We took the same trip, and then you just got off first. I got off last. And go ahead, Rickenzie.
So then would it be wrong not to claim Black? Because I've met, I wish we had Hispanic cultures on here, unless we do. But I've met working in Miami, I've met a lot of people who are Hispanic, but either Cuban, Puerto Rican, or Dominican.
For sure.
They will tell you, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican. They'll have more pigment than I have. But they're not this, they're specifically only their culture. There is no dash for them.
Yes. So that is such a great question. When you get into Latinx culture, now we're having a completely separate conversation about caste and about race. Because just like you're saying, Rickenzie, one of a good friend of mine, he's a Mexican-American pastor, but is also an activist out on the West Coast. And he said this thing to me, his name is Pastor Manny Artiega. And he said this and it blew my mind. He said, people of Spanish heritage are constantly warring between the reality of being both oppressed and oppressor. So that you have a people who we have never been that. I don't care what part of the world, right? I don't care which island, I don't care which country. We've never gotten the opportunity to be the oppressor. All right? Right? And so, whereas the Spanish, the Portuguese, have absolutely had that opportunity, right? The transatlantic slave trade began with the Portuguese. And so because of this, what happens is when you're talking about the countries that were colonized by the Spanish, you have now individuals that what happened in Cuba, in Brazil's a much better example. You had the Portuguese come, they colonized Brazil. They then enslaved and exterminated the native people in Brazil, but then they also brought African bodies from West Africa and enslaved them in Brazil. So you now have this mixing that a Brazilian is made up of native Brazilian, made up of African blood, made up of Portuguese blood. And what ends up happening is you have individuals who choose to identify with the Portuguese power and not the African enslaved, right? And so it has nothing to do with the fact that they're darker than you, Rickenzie. It has to do with a deep internalized hatred and a desire to want to have nothing to do with the blackness, that black part of their story, that they're saying, okay, no, I'm Portuguese, chill, right? I'm Cuban, right? And that is a much different conversation. The same thing goes when you get to the island of Hispaniola and you now deal with Haitians and Dominicans, right? Usually when you really go down into the narratives with Afro-Latino history, there is deep-seated trauma that is attached to their Spanish colonization, and more than likely there was a major African genocide. And so in a desire to want to forget trauma, we all do this. We pick the part of our story that we are most comfortable with, that gives us the most comfort.
Say that.
And so I think that that's what's happening. And many Afro-Latinos are still on a journey when it comes to embracing the fact that they too are African people. And so that's why you've got that tendency, depending on who you're talking to, they're more than likely going to either identify with their European heritage or their Hispanic Latino heritage. Now, as we come to the end, there is, I found some really amazing research I wanted to share with you guys, because I really think that this is, I'm gonna have to do this so that I can see it. Georgia Redway, in her dissertation, Black Caribbean immigrants in the United States and their perceptions of racial discrimination, understanding the impact of racial identity, ethnic identity, and racial socialization. She talks about the 5 stages of Black racial identity development, where basically she talks about how Caribbean immigrants go through these five stages at some point. They don't go through all 5 of them necessarily, but what ends up happening when they come to America, they have what she calls, or what she identifies as a pre-encounter, which is an individual. She or he has these pro-white and anti-Black racial attitudes, right? There's a perception of American Blackness, and there's a perception of whiteness. And usually the perception of whiteness is what is elevated, and the perception of Blackness is what is demonized. So that initial pre-encounter and coming to the country, there's a desire to figure out, how can I assimilate and attach myself to whiteness in this country and not this inferior Blackness, this inferior Black narrative that I have been told, right? Then they have what she calls as an encounter, which is the stage where the person experiences some kind of racism, right? Like we were just talking about this, even in many of you guys' own experiences, right? So I came with one particular mindset, and then now I had this experience, like Miss Dawn said, where a woman looked me dead in the face and said, "There's no one here to serve." And so now I'm like, oh my goodness. The narrative about anti-Blackness that I have been fed is an incorrect narrative. It is an inaccurate narrative because they are projecting this narrative onto me, and they don't know, like we talked about with Mr. Maddock earlier, that I'm Jamaican. I'm Trini. I'm not from here, guys. I'm different, right? That's the thinking is I'm different from them, the Black Americans. I'm expecting you to differentiate me in your treatment. When you don't, now is when I understand that there is no distinction between the two of us, at least in your eyes. So then they go through this third stage, which is the emergent, where the person may experience a great deal of rage as well as guilt due to having previously accepted the white or Eurocentric view. So it's like, oh man, I'm angry at this waitress and this server who had the audacity to look through me and deny my humanity. But now I am also internally feeling guilty because I believed the lie that they told me about the Black Americans. And now I see, they're not lazy, or they're not just doing this stuff because they want to. There really is a system that is at work that is against them. The fourth stage is the internalization phase, where he or she begins to resolve their feelings of guilt and anger and become aware that Black and white people have attributes that are both positive and negative, right? So, like I said, not everybody makes it through all 5 of these stages, but some people make it out of the third stage and into this fourth stage where it is, okay, you know what? We're dealing with humanity. And this is, I think, is a critical aspect when we're talking about the Christian approach as well. We're dealing with humanity. There are some really horrible things about white people. There are some problematic things about white people. There are some problematic things about Black people. And so I'm now seeing that my humanity also exists within that continuum. I, as a Black immigrant, there are some really positive things about me, and there are also some negative things about me. And so I'm now seeing that this broken, arbitrary, racialized system that has been used to divide us is just that. It is a fallacy. It is false. It is broken. It is not real. But it has very real effects. It has very real legislative impact. And so I'm now seeing that now in the fifth stage, if I can make it out of the fourth stage into the fifth stage, now I'm dealing with internalization commitment. Now I'm saying, you know what? I now want to I want to join with the fight. I want to become a part of this community that is saying this kind of treatment is inhumane. This kind of treatment is problematic. So I'm not going to see myself different and apart from. No longer am I going to see myself, see this dash as this line that is dividing me and separating me from a people. Instead, I'm just going to see this dash as a bridge that is going to help me walk across to a culture and a community that might not, inherently be mine. And so now we're going to walk across this bridge both ways and say, okay, what are the issues and concerns, the social justice issues that matter to Black Caribbean immigrants in America? What are the ways that we can advocate on their behalf, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 made it so that Asian Americans, really not just Asian Americans, but it was an immigration protection bill, as much as it was a bill that worked towards segregation and worked against discrimination in housing and work and things of this nature. And so in that sense, right, what are the things that Black Americans, we're sitting here like, man, I need to cross this bridge and identify what are the social issues, what are the ways that I can advocate and protect Black Caribbean immigrants in this country. And then now the Black Caribbean immigrants are also now crossing this bridge, crossing over this dash and being like, oh, you know what? Police brutality is a systemic issue. How can I now come in solidarity with the community and fight against this issue, or fight against mass incarceration, or fight against food deserts, or fight against whatever the social issue is in my direct, immediate Black community? And so that brings me to my final question for us to talk through quickly. What are the ways that we can celebrate our differences, but more importantly, unite around our similarities? What are ways that we can minister to each other regardless of our cultural differences? What are the ways that we can say, okay, you know what, Miss Donna Marie is British, American, and Trini, right? and I am from Michigan, right? So what are the things that I need to know and do practically to learn about her and her experience? And then what to meet her needs, both her social needs, her emotional needs, her spiritual needs. But then what are the things that she needs to do to also be able to now meet my rural Michigan American social, emotional, spiritual needs? Miss Dawn, I see your hand.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I learned that earlier on coming here, is that we need to tell our stories. We don't know each other's story well enough to be able to empathize as we should. And one of my friends who is on, she just sent me this thing, a quote by Chinua Achebe. He says, "Until the lion tells a story, the hunter always looks like the hero." So we need to share our stories in love, share our stories from a place of honesty and openness, so that we can begin to see that we are all revolving around the same pole. We're just passing at different times, or we're at different parts on it, but we're all revolving around the same pole. So I'm a big fan of telling the stories and listening to the stories.
That is beautiful. Yeah, I totally agree. I hope we got to at least exemplify a little bit of that today. I know, many of you got to share this today. I know so many of you are watching on YouTube. I pray that these transparent narratives that people have been sharing, you have been blessed by. Anybody else? Don't grow silent on me now.
I think for me, I think it is the appreciation that no one people or group has it all and knows it all. And sometimes that, and I know this coming out of both a British context and a Jamaican context, there is this thing, and I'm saying this because that's my experience, that we Jamaicans are very proud of our achievements and our impact around the world. And sometimes that can lend itself to look down on others, even from within the Caribbean. And so I said, well, it might be no, she's Jamaican. What you expect, or she's not Jamaican. We understand, Now, of course, with that has come some great things too. So that we have come to places, whether it's in a church or a community where nothing is happening, and through hard work and determination, the church has been revived or the community has been supported or whatever. But there is the other side of that, which is that we are better than. And of course, that also stems from, or comes out of my British experience too, where we thought we were the best thing, the empire and all of that. And I'll share a real quick story about how the mind can be so brainwashed. I remember the very first time going to Jamaica and going into places in Montego Bay and St. James, Dunbar, Paradise, and other places. And I remember saying to my mom, I was 17, and I saw these massive houses, and I said to my mom, who lives, because in my mind it had to be white folks, because all I knew was that we were poor and we lived in the shacks and we took care. And I remember walking, because my uncle was a doctor, and so he lived in that area. And we were going up to see him, and I saw these black folks on the balcony and hanging out, and I'm like, look, black people in big houses, because that was not what even my parents had shared, that there was that. You know, the idea was everybody who had come to the UK for a better life, and there was nothing really good back home, you know. So the sharing of the story and the telling of the truth about who we are and our history is a very, very important part of that. But once we have that, let's be humble, right? Well, let's be humble in where we have attained and what we have done. Recognize that's the grace of God.
So to add on to Pastor's note about like sharing history, like I feel like one of the biggest issues is that our history isn't never really taught. I can guarantee you that most of what I know from Black history doesn't come from what I learned in school. It's probably from movies or things that I've learned from other people. And then all of us are stuck here not knowing who we are as Black people. And kind of what we learn or we believe we are is what they're telling us we are. And then you kind of get stuck. Like, I know growing up, you know, I would be told that I'm not Black because of the way I speak, that I don't follow, like my vernacular doesn't fit.
You're not like them.
Exactly, because I couldn't hop a fence properly. Maybe I couldn't run fast enough, or I didn't spend all my time playing basketball. That took away from my Blackness. And it's things like that. We don't educate ourselves as to what we really are. We don't really share it. And even going back to the dashes, and this is where my issue has been with dashes, is that I feel like some people try to grab on to the little things that they believe make them not Black. It's like, oh, I'm Jamaican, but I'm also Chinese. Or I'm Jamaican and I'm also a little bit of Indian here, or Eskimo, or European even. And, you know, those little dashes out the Blackness makes you a little lighter. And that we can't never unite if we're not okay with being who we are. I mean, I think it starts with us as parents. If I don't have kids, but if you guys do, you know, starting there and teaching your children who they really are. One more note I wanted to ask is, as a possible future parent, I was wondering the idea of putting a child in a private school, right? But I'm afraid to put a child in a private school that's predominantly white, because I know the little things that could happen there. And I don't know if
not all.
I'll say this, and then I'm gonna drop it to the Maddox so they both can go and close this thing out. I grew up in predominantly white institutions, K through graduate school. I have never attended a historically Black college or university ever. I don't have anything negative to say about them. I think in people that go to those schools, I welcome them. I encourage them to do that. One thing that I personally experienced, while there certainly was some negativity that I experienced in various private schools, I do think that there was a preparation that I received there in learning how to deal with white people. I know how to talk to them. I know how to work with them. I know how to read them. I know how to understand them. I get white people. And one of the things that I think is critical for survival and success in America is understanding white people. And one thing that my friends who went to Morehouse and went to Spelman and went to Hampton, they told me when we met up in graduate school was, Claudia, I had a fantastic academic education. I had an amazing cultural experience. But when I got into a couple boardrooms, or I got into some corporations, I got into some jobs, I got into some situations, and then I experienced racism for the first time, or I experienced some name calling or some microaggression or something for the first time, and I did not know how to handle it. And so I think that it comes down to knowing your child. I'm not one that's like, send all your kids to an HBCU, send all your kids to a PWI. I think that by the time you and your wife have children and they are school age, I think that you'll be able to look at what their needs are and then make the best academic, social, and spiritual choice for them. That said, I think the onus on training our kids and teaching our kids about our history and our stories is on us. That will never come from an institution, whether it's a Black institution, white institution, you as the parent are responsible for reading certain books and showing certain movies and watching certain videos and having certain conversations. And I think if you can properly prepare your child for a society at home, in the same way that you can probably prepare your child for heaven at home, then you can send them to whatever school you or they want them to go to. I think that the message is, we don't have to wait for some structure to give us the tools. We've got the tools available to us right now, and we can do our own teaching, and we can do our own shaping and molding of ourselves and our young people, so that they have the best tools to be able to go out into the world with. For the Maddox, I saw your hand.
I don't know, maybe I'm naive, but I think the unity around similarities cannot exclude the desperate and almost, I don't know what to say, but the desperate search for an realization and actualization of essential Christianity. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I think we can do some cosmetic changes and look like situations are okay. We can even go further and do some behavioral changes. I don't think that, well, maybe I'm a pessimist, but I don't think the similarities that are not centered or based on a search for essential Christianity, because, and I hate to say Christianity, I maybe should say follower of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If we can find that platform,
yeah,
from across all ethnic groups, across all racial groups,
yep,
if we can settle on that platform,
yep,
what does it mean to be an essential follower of Christ?
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That is so good. You know, that leads me to my last slide. And there's a verse in Acts, I love it. It says, and hath made, speaking of God, God hath made of one blood all nations of men,
yep,
for to dwell on all the face of the earth,
mm-hmm,
and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. Meaning
mm-hmm,
that even the diaspora,
mm-hmm,
the dispersing of all peoples, not just African people, but the dispersing of all peoples around the world is literally something that God determined beforehand, that God thought about, that God did intentionally with purpose. That means that our diversity has meaning, it has significance. There's a reason for it to be. There's nothing wrong with all that comes with being Jamaican, and all that comes with being Japanese, and all that comes with being Brazilian, and all that comes with being Cuban. There's nothing wrong with those differences, but there is a uniting similarity that goes beyond the fact that we all like rice, and we all like beans, and we all like chicken. We just cook them all differently, right? There's this unity, there's this similarity in the fact that we are all made of one blood.
Amen.
We are all of one nation of men. So that in this sense, just like Mr. Maddox was saying, we are called to a kind of essential Christianity that is committed to saving the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Jesus came, he died on the cross for the world. And before he left, he said, I must leave so that the helper might come, so that you might be able to do greater works.
Mm-hmm.
And God is asking of us to do greater works. What are those greater works for? Those greater works are to serve the nations of men, those who have been dispersed all around the world. And so regardless of the soil upon which we live right now, the question that we must all ask ourselves is do we all share that one blood in Christ?
Amen.
And if so, then where can I start working in the vineyard to do this kind of essential Christianity that Mr. Maddox talked about. I love that phrase so much, Mr. Maddox. That this kind of essential Christianity that literally is in the business of saving souls and healing bodies. That's what we're wanting to do. I thank you guys so much for your time. You know, we've spent a little bit over an hour and a half, maybe or so together. I've been told that to be you don't have to be eternal to be everlasting. And so with that said, this concludes my presentation. I am so grateful to all of you for the robust conversation that we were able to have. Thank you again just for inviting me and allowing me to spend and share some time with you.
So much. Thank you so much. There is so much that we could say and have, you know, continued conversations about. I wanted to honor your time, but I'm desperate for maybe one or two questions that may be bursting from our attendees. We'll take one on Zoom and one on Facebook, and then we're going to close. So you'll need to be, or YouTube, you'll need to be quick. An essential question, if there is one, essential Christianity, essential question, just so we can honor those who have been, and the comments, both on YouTube and on this platform, just, and the interaction, not just comments, but interaction and awareness has been so powerful. So let me see.
It looks like there's a question here. An anonymous attendee, she writes, my children were born in the US and grandchildren put Haitian American. I'm Haitian born, raised totally in the US. I identify myself as Haitian American without the dash. I was raised colorblind because of my mixture in heritage. Yeah, you know, I don't want anybody to ever leave this conversation feeling like I'm telling you, you cannot identify with your roots, your country, your culture. You know, I think that what I'm talking about is regardless of where you're born, regardless of where your children are born, we have an obligation and a duty to one another. And so I have a duty to you as a Haitian American woman, as a Haitian American elder at that, if you say you have grandchildren. And I believe that it is a reverse, it is a mutual. And so please continue to cherish and celebrate your mixed heritage. Don't be colorblind, because color is real, culture is real. So we want to be able to see people for who they are and how they present and how they represent and move in the world. And it's okay to acknowledge the totality of one's being. But even in doing that, I can celebrate the differences that are in your body. And I pray that you can celebrate the differences that are in mine.
Great. Last question is a real good one, actually. And I know this one will get your teaching juices flowing. What book would you recommend? I'm gonna expand it to books. Someone on YouTube.
My pen.
Listen.
Man.
I look. I'm like, man, which ones should I pull out, guys? Man, there's so.
You were closing now, so we can't extend it. But which books?
No, but so one of my absolute favorite books to read is I'll give a couple different genres. This is what I'll do. Work of fiction by Toni Morrison called The Bluest Eye is a fantastic novel. It's about a young woman who explores, a young girl really, who is dealing with and exploring and dealing with her race. And she desires to have blue eyes, like white girl blue eyes. And the story has a phenomenal, mind-blowing twist at the end that I think is going to really open your mind and help you to think through some of the internalized some of the effects of internalized racism. The impact that living in this society and in this culture, the impact that it has had on us internally in ways that we're not even always conscious about. That's really what she highlights extremely well in that book. Another book that I would recommend is The Very Good Gospel by Lisa Sharon Harper. The Very Good Gospel by Lisa Sharon Harper. In that book, she talks about how the work of social justice is really the work of shalom, in the sense that what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring about reconciliation and a wholesale peace on the earth. And so she breaks down in such beautiful ways how, because of sin, we've not only been separated from God, right? Like we talk about that all the time. We've been severed from God. And so Jesus comes to reconcile us to the Father. But the fact is that when sin came into the earth, we were separated from God, we were separated from one another, and we were separated from nature. And so that in Christ's death is the work of reconciliation for all creation. So that the work of justice is about how humanity can, in Jesus, be reconciled back to the Father. Men can be reconciled to women. Cultures can be reconciled to cultures. And humanity as a whole can be reconciled to the earth, can be reconciled to nature, and can really begin to care about some of the environmental fallout that's happening right now. That we're not always championing, always talking about, always aware of. So those are the two, based on our conversation, that I would recommend you guys starting with. And obviously hit me up on social media or anything like that once you finish those, and I'll give you some more. You're muted, Pastor.
Yeah, the words of 2020 into 2021, you are muted, right? All right. How often that has been said around the world. Well, it's been tremendous. I think we have all been blessed. The comments are coming in. We have just to say we're wrapping up here on this stream, and let me see how much percent I've got left. I would get up and get my charger, but that would not be a good idea. So we're gonna just stay right here and say thank you for your presence. Sorry, and just your awesome ministry today. We have just been richly blessed. Folks saying bring back, to bring her back, I got a book like about 18 months in advance.
You know,
and especially after today, people who hadn't heard of you, I don't know how, they said, preacher, give me some numbers. I said, listen.
Wow.
So we
That's
praise
so
God.
Great.
Your ministry.
Praise God. Thank you.
Been so tremendous to us. For our those who are viewing, we close out with on Wednesday night, we have Pastor Chaplain Nigel David, who will be bringing us a word for our Worship Wednesday. Promises to be just a mighty word, and we have special music as well. Also on Sabbath, we are heading out big. We're closing out real big. We have Dr. Tyrone Douglas, who is the Associate Director for Diversity and Inclusion at the University of California, my good friend. And also, isn't he like same as you, Claudia, born in February, educator?
Yeah.
I saw that. And he will
His birthday, I think, is the day before mine. I did not know that until he posted. That was mind blowing. I was like, Ty, we've been on all these panels and programs together, and your birthday's the day before mine. That's crazy.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to having him to close out morning and afternoon. We also have the Deputy Chief of Lauderhill Police, who'll be with us earlier on in the afternoon, around about 3:30, talking about the race and the issues that affect our city in Lauderhill. So we're really looking forward to that. We have my home church in the UK will be leading our praise and worship. So we're excited about that as well. And we have a special poet who will be sharing some poetry on social justice as a surprise for us as well. So we are looking forward to the next few days as we share together. But for now, we're going to close out with prayer. Thank you all for watching, for being with us, for journeying with us. And what we have seen is that February is now not really, it's Black History Celebration. But I think we're saying now the whole year is about us being educated in Black history, and not just educated, being activated in that context too. We're going to close out with prayer, and we'll say thank you and good night. Father, we thank you. We thank you, Lord, for the blessings of the day. We thank you for the way that you've used our speaker just to speak to our hearts about areas and issues that for some of us are uncomfortable, and even ones that we have dismissed. We thank you, Lord, for not only seeing the greatness of who you have made us and the uniqueness of who we are, but also how we can be used, Lord, to proclaim the essential gospel of Jesus Christ. We thank you for Claudia. We thank you for her ministry, her gift. We pray you'll cover her and guide her as she continues to go forward, spreading education and this gospel message to all those who she comes in contact with. Lord, cover her, protect her, guide and order her steps. Be with us as we go into this unknown and untried week. We thank you for what you have done, and we praise you for what you will do. And we claim all, bless all are watching online, cover our families. Lord, we want to just spend a moment just to remember the family of Pastor Dwayne Thomas, a good colleague of ours who passed, Lord, and we're just lifting them up as we do for many of those who have bereaved and have lost loved ones. And we thank you for all of this. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, guys, take care. Good night. See you on
Good night.
Wednesday night. Thank you, Covenant.